Why did the laughter sting more than the war outside? The barracks of forward-operating base Kestrel echoed with a chorus of chuckles, boots scraping the concrete, metal mugs rattling against tables. The sound was sharper than the artillery thuds in the mountains beyond, sharper because it was directed at her. Staff Sergeant Ilowan Merrick stood near the entrance, duffel bag at her feet, rifle case in hand. Dust clung to her boots and the mountain air still lingered in her lungs. She had arrived with nothing but the gear she trusted. No fanfare, no welcome, just the immediate shift of eyes when the colonel noticed her. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood was a man who carried authority like an ornament. Broad shoulders, chest puffed, voice always filling whatever space he stood in. His men hung on every word, and in that moment his eyes flicked toward her case like a hawk spotting prey. "What's this?" he said, tone dripping with mockery. "Did supply run out of real rifles?" He motioned with 2 fingers and the laughter followed instantly, obedient. She didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. Instead, she bent to unlatch the case, each clasp clicking open like a tiny defiance. Inside lay the M24, old, scarred, weathered by years but immaculate, a rifle that had stories in its steel. Blackwood leaned closer, smirk playing at his lips. The museum must be missing a piece. More laughter, a rising tide. Ilowan's fingers brushed the stock. She adjusted the scope, slow, deliberate, her touch careful as if calming a restless heart. And then silence. The colonel's eyes had caught the engraving, something cut into the wood with precision. A mark, a crosshair with a star at its center. For the first time the man's bravado faltered, his words thinned, the laughter died. She said nothing, she never needed to. He turned away, covering the shift in his face with a commanding bark. "Briefing at 1800, don't be late." The room broke apart into chatter again, but it was different now. A subtle unease crept through the air. One soldier, Sergeant Octavia Farrow, lingered, watching Ilowan with eyes that didn't mock, curious, searching, the only one who hadn't laughed. Ilowan closed the case, the sound sharp against the stone walls, and moved toward her assigned bunk. Her movements were precise, economical. Every strap tightened, every pouch aligned. The others filled the room with noise, calibrating gear, boasting, checking digital readouts. They trusted their equipment the way children trusted nightlights. "First deployment?" a young corporal asked, sidling closer. "Riven Lock, too eager, too green." "No." He chuckled nervously, trying again. "That rifle's older than me." Ilowan finally lifted her gaze. It was calm, unreadable, but something in it made him step back, as if he'd leaned too close to a flame. "When there's something worth saying," she replied softly. His face tightened, embarrassed. He muttered something under his breath, but Octavia cut in, her tone level. "That M24 been maintained well. Most wouldn't know how to handle it." Ilowan's eyes flicked toward her, a brief acknowledgement, "Thank you." Their exchange ended as Blackwood's voice sliced through the barracks. "Farrow, comms check. Lock, tighten your focus. This isn't a training exercise." The soldiers obeyed, always. Ilowan returned to her gear. Each round she inspected, rolling between her fingers, eyes scanning for imperfections. Tiny rituals, ingrained by years of repetition. Her body worked on autopilot, leaving her mind free to study them, the team she was expected to depend on. They were skilled, yes, professionals, but she saw it instantly, their reliance on gadgets, their faith in blinking lights and automated systems. They trusted their gear more than their instincts. That kind of trust could break in silence, and in silence people died. When the briefing came, the holographic glow filled the room, casting blue shadows across hard faces. A compound lit up in 3 dimensions, lines of approach mapped with digital neatness. Blackwood moved through it with practiced command, confidence dripping from every syllable. "Our intel suggests heavy resistance inside. Compound has signal jamming capabilities, but we've got redundancies. Multiple layers. Technology has us covered. quick in, quick out. He pointed at the projection, every gesture rehearsed. Ilowan in the back scribbled in a small weathered notebook, pencil scratching softly. Something to add, Staff Sergeant, Blackwood's voice sharpened. She didn't look up. Wind in that valley pushes east, 3 to 5 miles an hour. Your systems won't read it right. The air thickened, the colonel stiffened. Our targeting accounts for all variables, he shot back. Not that one. The silence stretched. Nervous laughter from Riven tried to fill it, but even he couldn't quite mask the tension. Octavia noticed Ilowan's thumb brush the engraving on the stock. That mark again. Zephyr Kadri, the lieutenant, cleared his throat. Mountain winds can be unpredictable, sir. She may have a point. Blackwood's jaw clenched. We've run 17 extractions with this system. I don't need 19th century ballistics lessons. He pressed on, ignoring her. But his voice had lost some of its certainty. When the briefing ended, he stopped her at the door. On my operations, we follow my equipment. Clear. Crystal, sir. No tone, no edge, just words empty of weight. She left him with his authority intact. He believed he still held it. Zephyr lingered after, voice low. Sir, I checked her file. Almost nothing there, just transfer papers. It's like someone erased her. Blackwood frowned, suspicion darkening. Keep an eye on her. I want to know who she really is. Outside, under the cold sweep of mountain stars, Ilowan finally allowed stillness. Away from their voices, away from their eyes. From her pocket, she drew out a folded paper, her real orders. The mission was what Blackwood thought. The target wasn't who he expected. But that wasn't his concern. Not yet. She refolded it with care, slipped it back into her pocket. Her hand moved unconsciously to the rifle case, finding the leather strap worn smooth by years. The familiar weight calmed her heartbeat. She didn't need their respect. She didn't need their belief. What mattered was tomorrow, and tomorrow would be different than anyone expected. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? Dawn painted the Kyber Mountains in bruised shades of purple and gray, cold air cutting through layers of fabric as the team moved toward their positions. Every breath showed white against the fatting night, dissipating like secrets whispered into the dark. Colonel Blackwood's voice crackled in their ears, confident as always, digital clarity wrapping around every word. All units, positions confirmed. Command verifies target asset is in the southeast building. On my mark. His tone was steady, but Ilowan heard something beneath it, a thread of doubt, barely there. The kind of doubt a man would rather die than admit. She lay prone in the snow-dusted rocks of the south approach, exactly where she'd been ordered. Rifle steady. Scope aligned. Riven Lock beside her, fidgeting, recalibrating his system again and again like a nervous tick. His weapon looked more like a console than a rifle, sensors blinking, readouts scrolling across his visor. You really think that antique can hit anything from here? He whispered, trying to sound casual. If needed. She said it simply, but the words landed heavier than he expected. He swallowed and turned back to his scope. Through their earpieces, Zephyr Kadri's voice broke in. Perimeter security neutralized, ready for breach in 30. And then nothing. His words sliced mid-sentence into static. Blackwood's voice sharper now. Tech team report. Only the crackle of interference. The comms were gone. For a man who trusted systems more than soldiers, it was like watching the floor collapse beneath him. Protocol, Blackwood ordered, forced calm straining in his tone. Fall back to rally point, now. Riven shifted, panic edging his whisper. You hear that? We move, now. Ilowan stayed still. You go. What? His voice cracked. Go, I'll maintain position. Are you insane? Those are direct orders. She turned her head slowly, eyes on him, calm, cold. Sometimes orders change when situations do. Go. For a moment he held her gaze, then faltered. He packed up hurriedly, scrambling back toward the rally point, muttering curses to mask the fear in his voice. Ilowan waited until he disappeared. Only then did she move, not back, not toward safety, but uphill toward the north ridge she had suggested during briefing, the position Blackwood dismissed, the one no one believed in. Her boots found the path with muscle memory. The climb was steep, treacherous, but her body moved with practiced ease. Years of training in harsher terrain had taught her how to breathe with the earth, how to make every step count. Within minutes she reached the ridge. The world unfolded below her, the compound alive with movement, shadows streaming from hidden doors. This wasn't a holding site. It was a forward base disguised as civilian. Soldiers poured into defensive positions, their weapons trained on the south, exactly where Blackwood's team would be exposed. Her jaw tightened. The ambush was too perfect. Someone had told them, someone had compromised the mission. She set up her rifle. The movements were fluid, automatic, bipod locked, stock nestled into her shoulder, scope aligned. She slowed her breathing, body stilling until even the wind felt muted. At the rally point, confusion thickened like smoke. Zephyr slammed his gear, trying to reboot. Systems are dead, locked out completely. It's like they've been jammed remotely. They knew we were coming, Octavia said, voice low almost to herself. Gunfire erupted from the compound, bullets spraying across rocks, forcing the team down. Blackwood barked orders, but his weapon's targeting system flickered, half-blind. "Return fire," he shouted. But their shots were wild, scattered, technology failing them when instinct should have taken over. "Where's Merrick?" Blackwood demanded suddenly, eyes scanning. Riven blurted. She refused to fall back, said she'd hold position. A shot cracked through the chaos, a single sharp note that sliced the air. Then another. And another. Not frantic, not desperate, each one measured, timed, final. On the ridge, Ilowan tracked her targets like shadows in a dance. 8 figures, 8 threats, each fell where they stood, no wasted bullets, no second chances. Down below, the hostile fire thinned, then stopped altogether. Silence, the kind that leaves men staring at each other, realizing something impossible had just unfolded. Octavia lifted her eyes, scanning the horizon, and there 2 miles out, barely a silhouette against the mountain, Ilowan, rifle steady, still as stone. "Impossible," Zephyr whispered. "No one can shoot at that distance, not without systems." 8 shots, Octavia counted quietly. 8 confirmed. Blackwood raised his binoculars, his breath caught. The mark on the rifle's stock flashed in the early light. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. His lips formed the words before he even knew he'd spoken them. "The Deadeye program." Riven looked at him, bewildered. "What's that?" Octavia's answer was soft, reverent. "Not what, who." Ilowan packed her rifle with the same precision she'd unpacked it. No celebration, no acknowledgement, just the steady rhythm of someone who knew this was only the beginning. She vanished from the ridge as quickly as she'd appeared, leaving silence behind. Back at the rally point, Blackwood tried to hold his composure, but his men saw it, the frozen look in his eyes, the weight of something he couldn't yet name. Because the mission wasn't what he thought, the target wasn't who he expected, and Ilowan Merrick wasn't who she claimed to be. Not yet. How do you follow someone you no longer understand? The mountains were quiet again, but not in a way that comforted. Quiet like a room after an argument, when the words still hang invisible in the air, poisoning it. The team moved toward the extraction vehicle hidden in the ravine, boots crunching through gravel, each man and woman carrying more than their gear. They carried questions they weren't ready to ask. Blackwood led, posture stiff, the kind of stiffness that betrayed unease. His confidence had cracked, though he tried to patch it with command bark and steady strides. Octavia moved just behind him, silent, her eyes sharper than usual. Riven glanced around too often, as if expecting ghosts to rise from the rocks. Zephyr's face was pale, caught between awe and suspicion. And then there was Ilowan. She was already there when they arrived, rifle case in hand, body poised as if the ridge hadn't drained her at all. Her breathing was calm, her expression unreadable. The snow at her boots was still unsettled from where she'd been kneeling, watching them approach. Blackwood stopped short, words caught in his throat. All he managed was, "How?" Ilowan didn't answer. Instead, she lifted a small device, no larger than a book, the casing scratched from hurried removal. A signal jammer tuned precisely to their equipment's frequency. "Someone told them exactly what to block," she said. Her voice was steady, almost too steady. No pride, no triumph, just fact. Octavia stepped closer, studying the device. Her jaw tightened. That level of calibration requires access to our technical specifications. "Exactly," Ilowan replied. For the first time, Colonel Blackwood had no retort. His authority, once unshakable, hung like threadbare cloth. Then Octavia's earpiece chimed faintly, one of the redundancies sparking back to life. She listened, face darkening, before looking at Blackwood. "Sir, I just received an encrypted directive. Staff Sergeant Merrick has been authorized to assume operational command." The words hung in the air like gunpowder. Riven blinked. "What, on whose authority?" Ilowan opened her rifle case. Inside, the mark carved into the stock caught the dim light. A crosshair, a star, the kind of symbol you didn't forget once you knew what it meant. Blackwood's color drained. He straightened, as if instinct demanded respect before he even thought. "The Deadeye program," he whispered. Riven looked from face to face, confusion mounting. "What the hell is that?" Octavia's voice softened, but it carried weight. "The most classified sniper program in history. 7 operatives. Over 300 confirmed shots, all deemed impossible." Zephyr's mouth went dry. "I thought that was rumor." "It was meant to be," Octavia replied. The colonel shifted uneasily, voice lower now. "Major Merrick, I wasn't informed of your true rank." Ilowan finally met his eyes, calm, direct. That was the point. The revelation cracked the ground beneath them all. Blackwood, once mocking, now stood at attention. Riven gawked openly, his world suddenly twisted into something he didn't understand. Zephyr's hands twitched toward his gear, then away again, as if even touching it now felt wrong. Only Octavia remained still, her gaze steady on Ilowan, but with something new in her eyes: respect. Ilowan closed the case. Her next words dropped like stones into water. "The extraction wasn't real. It was cover. Our actual mission is to identify and neutralize a leak in military intelligence. Someone has been feeding details to the enemy. 3 teams lost in the last month, and someone tried to make us the 4th." Blackwood's face hardened. "You suspected my team." "I suspected everyone," Ilowan replied evenly, "including you." Riven bristled, indignation breaking through his shock. "You used us as bait." "I used a controlled scenario to expose a pattern," she said. "No one was at risk. I maintained Overwatch." "Overwatch?" His voice rose, cracking. "You call 8 kills from 2 miles out Overwatch?" "Yes," the single word silenced him. Zephyr spoke next, slow, trying to piece it together. "Those shots, you neutralized an entire offensive with no digital targeting. That's," he shook his head, "that's not human." Octavia corrected softly, "That's Deadeye." Ilowan didn't confirm, she didn't deny. Her silence was an answer in itself. But then her voice shifted, steel beneath calm. "The leak isn't on your team. It's higher. Someone with access to your specs, your comm protocols. Someone who knew I'd be here and tried to eliminate me before I could find them." The colonel clenched his fists, anger rising. "How can you be so sure?" She held up the jammer again. "Because this was designed for your exact system. No outsider would have that information, only command level." The weight of betrayal pressed down on them all. For soldiers who lived on trust, The idea of rot in the chain of command was heavier than bullets. Octavia broke the silence. What's the next step? Ilowan's gaze was steady. We find who sold us out, and we do it without systems they can monitor. Observation, deduction, skill, the old way. Riven scoffed, though his voice trembled. The old way, against enemies with tech that can blind entire teams. Adapt, she said simply. Blackwood stared at her for a long moment. His pride was gone, his authority hollow, but in its place a flicker of something else, reluctant respect, and maybe relief. He nodded once, then where do we begin? Ilowan glanced north toward the higher mountains, their peaks still shadowed by dawn. Her expression didn't change. With the man who designed your systems, Dr. Harren Voss. 3 years ago they said he died in a lab accident. That was the official story. The truth is different. Her hand pressed briefly against the rifle case. The mark engraved there was not just memory, it was a promise. Voss is alive, she said, and he's waiting for us. What do you do when the path ahead no longer belongs to maps? The mountains swallowed them whole. Snow crusted the jagged ridges, the air thinner with each step. Technology meant nothing here. Compasses trembled against magnetic veins in the rock, GPS feeds flickered uselessly, and the men who had trusted sensors more than their own eyes found themselves stripped of certainty. Ilowan Merrick led them with the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need blinking screens to know where she was. She read the land the way others read print, a slant of wind, a shift in the snow, the outline of a ridge. Every footstep seemed measured, deliberate, as if she had walked this ground before. Blackwood followed, silent now. The colonel who once mocked her rifle now studied her every movement, not with arrogance but with something close to humility. He had no map. She was the map. Riven stumbled more than once, boots sliding against loose gravel. His breathing was ragged, untrained lungs clawing at the thin air. We train for cities, he muttered, for deserts, not mountain climbing. Ilowan didn't slow. The enemy chooses the battlefield, we adapt. Her words cut deeper than they seemed. Octavia caught the glance she gave Riven, not harsh, not dismissive, almost instructive. By midday their shadows stretched long against the ridges. The climb steepened, trails narrowing to thin veins cut into the rock. Once, Riven's foot slipped, his body pitching sideways toward a sheer drop. Zephyr caught his harness at the last second, hauling him back with a grunt. For a moment they just stared at each other, the fear raw on both faces. They pressed on. The air sharpened, thinner, colder. Even the silence seemed heavier, pressing against lungs, ears, and nerves. Finally, Ilowan lifted a hand. They stopped. Ahead, half buried into the mountain, was a structure invisible until you stood directly before it, steel doors blended into rock. A man slouched outside, rifle at his side, his body language lazy. A guard who believed he had no reason to be alert. Blackwood reached instinctively for his sidearm. Standard takedown. Ilowan shook her head. We need him alive, no alarms. She slid a pouch from her kit, drew a slim blowpipe no longer than her forearm, and loaded a dart tipped with faint liquid. The others stared, Riven with disbelief, Octavia with fascination. Old school, Zephyr murmured. Ilowan lifted it, exhaled once, and the dart hissed through the air. It struck the guard's neck. He dropped silently, unconscious before he hit the ground. She tucked the pipe away without a word. He'll be out 20 minutes, we move now. The team moved like shadows, pressing against the steel face of the facility as Ilowan led them inside. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and stale recycled air, humming faintly with machinery. For soldiers used to open combat, the silence was suffocating. At the heart of the complex, they found him. Dr. Harren Voss. Thin, hollow-cheeked, glasses perched awkwardly on his nose. His hands shook, not from age but from nerves. And when he saw Ilowan, his eyes widened with recognition that cut deeper than fear. They sent you, he said, voice cracking. Of course they did. He didn't resist when they secured him. No fight, no struggle, just resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. "You were supposed to be dead," Blackwood muttered, scanning the lab around them, banks of servers, stacks of schematics, blueprints pinned across walls. Voss gave a dry laugh, brittle as glass. That was the official story. They needed the world to believe it. "What is this place?" Octavia asked, eyes scanning rows of machines. "Not what," Ilowan said. "Who? The man who sold out your systems." Voss's lips twitched. "I didn't sell anything. I redirected. Knowledge doesn't belong to governments. It belongs to whoever uses it best." "Best?" Blackwood's voice hardened. "Your buyers ambushed my team. Men died." The scientist's gaze flicked past him, landing on Ilowan. "And yet she's here, which means they underestimated you. They always do." Ilowan's face didn't move. Not a flicker. But Octavia, standing near, noticed her hand brush the edge of her rifle case, not aggressive but protective. While Zephyr and Riven restrained Voss, Ilowan and Octavia searched the lab. What they found made the air heavier. Stacks of files, mission records, 12 compromised operations, 37 dead, each one tied to the systems Blackwood's men trusted more than their instincts. On a workbench, Octavia found a laptop wired to a crude external override. She connected a physical key, bypassing the encryption. Files spilled across the screen, transaction records, payments traced not just to foreign buyers, but to accounts within their own command structure. She read aloud, voice tight. "General Whitmore, Colonel Davenport, Major Chen, all tied to Voss's funding." Blackwood froze. "Whitmore, he signed off on our mission, personally." Ilowan's tone was calm but final, which means the leak wasn't just tolerated, it was protected. Octavia found another file. Video. Grainy but clear enough. Whitmore's face appeared, speaking with Voss across a table. His voice was low, conspiratorial, promising protection in exchange for what Voss provided. Blackwood turned away, jaw clenched. Betrayal tasted bitter on his tongue. "This is why you were sent," he said, realization dawning. "Not just to stop Voss, to expose them." Ilowan gave no answer, but her silence was louder than words. Voss shifted in his restraints, voice brittle but laced with something like conviction. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. The targeting systems were just the beginning. We're building something greater. No more human error. No more casualties. Machines that fight for us." "Machines that decide who lives and dies?" Ilowan asked softly. Voss smiled, thin and tired. "Progress is inevitable. Your kind, your program, your rifle, your relics." Her gaze didn't falter. She said nothing, but Octavia noticed the way her thumb brushed the carved mark on her stock, as if reminding herself of something only she understood. Outside, the sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the mountainside. They had what they came for: Voss alive, evidence secured. But what they carried weighed more than the gear on their backs. Not just betrayal, not just lies. The proof that even inside the highest ranks, someone had decided soldiers were expendable. And that machines, not people, were meant to inherit the battlefield. What happens when the enemy you carry home is an idea? The descent began with shadows stretching long across the ridges, the sun sinking fast behind jagged peaks. The air had grown colder, sharper, but it wasn't just the altitude that chilled them. Every man and woman on the team felt it. The weight of truth, the betrayal coiled inside those files. Dr. Heron Voss stumbled between Zephyr and Octavia, his wrists bound but his mouth unbound, and he used it. "You don't see the elegance of it, do you?" His voice wavered with exhaustion, yet carried the certainty of a man convinced by his own genius. "Autonomous combat systems, they don't tire, they don't bleed, they don't make mistakes born of fear." Blackwood snapped back without turning. "They also don't care who they kill." Voss chuckled, thin and brittle. "Exactly. No bias, no hesitation, pure precision. You cling to this illusion that courage and sacrifice matter. They don't. Efficiency wins wars. His words slithered through the team. Riven scowled, muttering under his breath. Zephyr kept his gaze forward, but his shoulders tensed with each step. Octavia glanced once at Ilowan, searching for reaction. But Ilowan said nothing. She walked ahead, rifle case in hand, boots steady against loose stone. Her silence was deliberate, measured. Only when they paused on a narrow ledge to catch their breath did she finally speak. Courage isn't an illusion. Her voice was soft, but the words carried. It's the only reason anyone comes home. Voss smiled thinly. And yet you bury more soldiers every year. Tell me, Major, how many names weigh on you? How many nights have you closed your eyes and seen the ones you didn't save? For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Ilowan's hand brushed the worn leather strap of her rifle case. Her gaze didn't move from the mountains ahead. Enough to know machines will never carry that weight. They'll never understand the cost of what they do. Her voice was calm, but the silence after it was heavier than any gunfire. They moved on. As darkness thickened, they made camp beneath a rocky overhang. No digital sensors, no blinking monitors, just a small fire barely enough to keep frost from biting, flames hidden from distant eyes. The team sat in a loose circle, gear stacked, rifles close, ears tuned to every sound in the valley. Blackwood studied his men and realized they weren't his anymore. Their eyes drifted to Ilowan, waiting, watching, as if the quiet sniper who once drew ridicule had somehow become the center of their gravity. She sat apart, sharpening a knife against a stone. The rhythm steady, sparks small, not a leader giving orders but something heavier, a presence. Riven broke the silence first. How'd you do it, back at the ridge, 8 shots, no tech, no readouts, just, he shook his head, just you. Ilowan paused, the blade hovering mid-motion. For a long moment she didn't answer, then, by listening. Riven frowned, listening. To the wind, to the earth under you, to the rhythm of your own heart until it slows enough to match what's around it. The shot isn't math, it's memory. The land tells you what to do if you know how to hear it. Her words hung in the firelight, half instruction, half reflection. Blackwood shifted, leaning forward. That's what the Deadeye program taught you. Ilowan's eyes flicked to him briefly. The program reminded me. The earth taught me first. Octavia's lips curved faintly, almost a smile. She understood. She always had. Zephyr leaned back, rubbing his temples. We've been trained to trust data, sensors, readouts. Without them, I feel blind. Ilowan slid the knife back into its sheath, then learned to see again. Silence followed, not uncomfortable this time but thoughtful. Voss snorted softly, breaking it. Romantic nonsense. You're clinging to instinct because you fear irrelevance. My systems make soldiers unnecessary. One day, children will read about you the way they read about swords and shields. Riven's temper flared. You think 37 dead were just progress? Collateral, Voss said flatly. Every revolution demands sacrifice. Ilowan's gaze shifted to him, calm but sharp. Revolutions don't usually start with betrayal. For the first time, Voss looked away. Night deepened. One by one they settled, taking turns at watch. Ilowan took the last shift, as always. She sat with her rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the ridgelines. The cold bit at her face, but she barely felt it. When the sky began to pale with the first touch of dawn, Blackwood approached quietly, boots crunching on frost. He stopped beside her, unsure how to begin. I owe you an apology, he said finally. His voice was low, stripped of rank. I judged you by your gear, not your ability. Ilowan didn't turn. We all make that mistake. Blackwood exhaled, a cloud of breath vanishing into the air. I thought I understood leadership, thought technology gave me certainty, but out here, he shook his head. Out here, I'm the blind one. Now she looked at him, her expression unreadable but not unkind. The good ones learn from it. He nodded slowly, and for the first time there was no distance in his eyes, no arrogance, only respect. When the others woke, they ate in silence, the kind that comes not from tension but from endurance. They were changing, though none would admit it yet, less reliant on their gadgets, more aware of the air in their lungs, the weight of their rifles, the land beneath their boots. Ilowan watched them quietly, not with pride, not with satisfaction, but with something softer, the knowledge that survival meant adaptation, and adaptation meant unlearning what they thought was unshakable. The mountains still loomed ahead. Voss still walked among them, his words seeding doubt like poison. But the team was no longer the same men and women who had laughed at her rifle. And that change was only beginning. What happens when the fight isn't on the battlefield, but in the chain of command? The return to base was quiet, almost too quiet. No alarms, no intercepted patrols, no signs of pursuit. For seasoned soldiers, silence could be worse than bullets. It meant someone wanted them to believe they were safe. Ilowan walked point, rifle case slung against her shoulder, eyes cutting across ridgelines and valleys. Her body gave no hint of fatigue, but her silence was heavier now. Not cautious, calculating. Every step carried her closer to the truth she already suspected. Behind her, Blackwood's team moved in wary formation. Zephyr kept scanning his malfunctioning gear out of habit, as if it might suddenly wake back to life. Riven trudged with a permanent scowl, restless energy twitching in his limbs. Octavia kept near Voss, her hand never far from her weapon. And Voss. He talked always. "They'll never let you show this evidence," he muttered as they approached the perimeter lights of Kestrel. "Do you know what happens to people who threaten the illusion of control? They disappear. The truth doesn't survive in files. It dies in locked drawers." "Keep walking," Octavia ordered. He smirked, adjusting his glasses against the rope at his wrists. "You think you're delivering justice. You're delivering yourself into the hands of men who already sold you out." Blackwood's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. At the gates, the guards hesitated when they saw who the team escorted. Recognition flickered in their eyes, followed by confusion. No questions were asked. Orders must have already traveled faster than boots. The gates opened. Inside, the base hummed with its usual rhythm. Helicopters idled, mechanics shouted, screens blinked. To anyone else, it was a normal day in a war zone. To Ilowan, it was a stage built on fractures. She led them straight to the barracks. Only when the heavy door closed behind them did the weight settle. They had carried betrayal into their home. Zephyr broke first. "What now? We dump Voss in holding, send the files up the chain and hope they don't vanish before anyone sees them." Blackwood looked at Ilowan. The question was his, but the answer belonged to her. "There's a protocol," she said quietly. "When command is compromised, evidence bypasses the chain. It goes directly to the Joint Chiefs." Riven snorted. "You really think they'll believe us over Whitmore, over Davenport, over Chen? These men built careers on being untouchable." "They won't believe you," Ilowan replied. "They'll believe what they can't deny." Octavia tapped the files on the table. Encrypted transfers, payment records, video evidence. They can't bury all of it. "They'll try," Voss said smoothly, leaning against the wall despite his restraints. "And if they can't bury it, they'll bury you." The team fell silent. His words were venom, but they weren't lies. Blackwood stepped closer to him, voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to gloat, not after the men you cost." Voss's eyes glittered behind his glasses. "And yet here I am, still breathing, because deep down you know I'm right. The age of soldiers is ending, your artifacts clinging to relevance." Ilowan's voice cut through before Blackwood could respond. "Artifacts don't bleed for each other. Machines don't bury their dead. Soldiers do." Her words lingered. For a moment, even Voss had no reply. Later, when Voss was transferred under guard to a secured holding cell, the team gathered in the briefing room. The holographic projectors glowed again, painting blue light across tired faces. But this time, no one trusted the light. Ilowan laid out the evidence across the table. No theatrics, no speeches, just truth in physical form, files, drives, schematics, proof that could tear careers apart. Riven leaned forward, shaking his head. I still don't get it. Why us? Why bait our team? We're not special. We're not important enough to risk exposing something this big. Octavia answered before Ilowan could. Because we were easy to predict, reliant on tech, predictable in tactics, the perfect test case. Ilowan added softly, and because I was here, someone knew Deadeye would disrupt the pattern. Blackwood sat heavily, his shoulders sagging with the weight of everything he hadn't seen. He looked at her across the table, and for once his voice carried no command, just a question. What happens if the Joint Chiefs don't back you? Ilowan's eyes flicked toward him, steady and unreadable. Then we do what Deadeye was made for, survive without recognition, complete the mission no matter who tries to stop us. Silence. Then Zephyr exhaled slowly, nodding. Octavia followed with a simple, quiet understood. Riven hesitated longer, but even he finally muttered, Guess I'd rather trust instincts than die waiting on batteries. The shift was subtle, but it was real. The team was no longer fractured by disbelief. They were tethered by something heavier, shared betrayal, and the woman who had turned that betrayal into purpose. For the next hours they worked. Files copied, evidence secured in multiple formats. No reliance on digital encryption alone. Physical duplicates stored in waterproof pouches, analog backups scribbled in notebooks. The old way mixed with the new. Ilowan moved among them, guiding without commanding. She showed Riven how to align manual sights to wind drift, corrected Zephyr's breathing on a practice shot, pointed out to Octavia how silence wasn't absence but information. Even Blackwood listened, his arrogance stripped, his pride reforged into discipline. By nightfall, something had changed. They were no longer just a colonel's unit propped up by technology. They were a team in the making, one that could survive in silence, in failure, in betrayal. Ilowan watched them. Her face gave little away, but deep inside she knew. They were learning, slowly, painfully, but learning. She stepped outside when the room grew too heavy with the smell of screens and fatigue. The night was clear. Stars spread sharp across the sky. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a breath that didn't feel borrowed. Blackwood found her there, stepping into the cold. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, his posture no longer that of a commander needing to be seen, but of a man humbled. I used to think respect came with rank, he said quietly. Now I know it's earned the hard way, and I mocked the very thing that kept us alive. Ilowan didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Respect isn't given, it's not even asked for. It's proven, one choice at a time. His jaw tightened, but this time it wasn't in defiance. It was in acceptance. Inside the barracks, Riven tried again with his rifle, his hands shaking less now. Octavia watched him, correcting gently. Zephyr recorded wind speeds with nothing but scraps of paper and a compass. For the first time, they weren't mocking the old way. They were reaching for it. And Ilowan, silent on the edge of the base, knew this was only the beginning. Because betrayal wasn't just something they uncovered. It was something they now had to carry into the next fight, into the next mission, into the heart of a war that wasn't only against enemies in the mountains. The real war had already begun. What happens when truth finally reaches the light, and you're not sure who will survive it? The evidence traveled faster than boots or bullets ever could. Within days, the files reached the Joint Chiefs, bypassing every compromised layer of command. And within days after that, shockwaves rippled through the highest offices of the military. General Whitmore, Colonel Davenport, Major Chen, men whose names carried weight in briefing rooms and ceremonies, arrested, faces once polished for cameras now plastered across headlines. Blackwood's team watched the news feed from the barracks, their expressions caught between disbelief and fury. Riven leaned forward, shaking his head. They signed off our missions, sat behind desks while we bled, and all the while they were selling us out. Zephyr's hands tightened into fists. 37 soldiers dead, and they sat at tables pretending they led with honor. Octavia's face was harder, quieter. They didn't just betray soldiers, they betrayed the idea of what we are. The screen flickered to another image, Dr. Harren Voss, his thin face bowed under the weight of shackles, escorted by military police into a secured facility. Even then, his lips curved faintly, as if he believed the world was still moving in his direction. Blackwood shut the feed off. The room sank into silence. Ilowan stood apart, arms crossed, gaze steady but distant. She had seen it before, truth tearing down pillars, only to reveal rot deeper beneath. Exposed men were only symptoms. The disease lingered higher, wider. She didn't say it, not yet, but she knew. For the team, the days that followed blurred into something strange. No missions, no orders, just waiting, and in the waiting, Ilowan trained them. On the range, she placed targets without sensors, without digital overlays. Just wind, distance, and silence. "Technology breaks," she said softly, standing behind Riven as he struggled to steady his breathing. "People adapt." Riven squinted through iron sights, the shot jerking wide. He swore under his breath. Ilowan adjusted his stance with a tap to his shoulder, a nudge to his elbow. "Breathe with the earth. Slow down until you feel it." He tried again. The round struck closer this time, not perfect but better. His frustration thinned, replaced by something quieter, determination. Zephyr studied weather charts the way others studied sermons. He recorded gusts, temperatures, the shift of clouds. For the first time, he realized the air itself could be more reliable than any readout. Octavia took to it easily, as if she'd been waiting all along for someone to remind her instinct wasn't weakness. She moved with Ilowan often, silent in her footsteps, patient in her questions. Blackwood watched his team transform. Men and women who once mocked the old way now leaned into it like a lifeline, and he watched Ilowan most of all. At night, she sat alone at the edge of the base, a photograph folded in her hands. Octavia noticed once, catching a glimpse of faces, 6 others, their expressions marked by the same quiet gravity Ilowan carried. "The others?" Octavia asked quietly, careful not to intrude too far. Ilowan didn't answer at first, then softly, "Family." Octavia nodded. She understood. Some truths didn't need expansion. But not everyone could let silence carry them. Riven finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him for days. Why us? Why this team? If the Deadeye program was so untouchable, why risk bringing us into it? Ilowan closed the notebook she had been writing in. Because the enemy knew your weaknesses. They built their trap around them. That meant exposing you was the only way to break the pattern. Riven swallowed hard, so we were expendable. Her eyes lifted, calm but sharp. You were necessary. The distinction cut deep. He didn't argue again. Weeks passed, but the war outside the base didn't pause for their reckoning. Reports whispered of growing unrest in the mountains, of units compromised, of technology that still failed without explanation. Voss might have been in chains, but his architecture still bled into the field. One evening, as dusk turned the horizon to ash and ember, Blackwood entered the barracks with an envelope in hand. His face carried something new, not arrogance, not defeat. Resolve. "Orders came through," he said, voice steady. "Next operations extraction again. High-value target, but this time," he looked at Ilowan, "they requested you lead planning." The room stilled. Riven sat up straighter. Zephyr leaned forward. Octavia's lips curved faintly as if she'd been expecting it. Ilowan gave a single nod. No triumph, no hesitation, just acceptance. "We'll do it together," she said. Blackwood placed the envelope on the table, stepping back as though acknowledging the shift fully. The team no longer orbited him. They orbited her. And yet Ilowan didn't claim it. She only redirected it. As the others gathered around the map spread across the table, she guided their eyes, their questions, their hands. No reliance on blinking screens this time. Just terrain, instinct, and judgment. Octavia noticed again how Ilowan's hand drifted to her pocket when she leaned over the map. The photograph, always close. The others, she whispered again. Ilowan's reply was the same, doing what needs to be done, without recognition. Octavia smiled faintly. She understood now. By the end of the night, the plan was set. Simpler, leaner, built not on fragile systems but on people who could adapt when systems failed. As the team prepared their gear, Riven approached Ilowan hesitantly, his rifle in hand. It was the same advanced platform he had mocked her M24 with weeks before. But now, a pair of manual backup sights had been mounted along the barrel. "Just in case the system fails," he said quietly. Ilowan studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Approval, rare and quiet. "Adapt and overcome," she said. For Riven, the words were heavier than metals. That night, as the base quieted, Blackwood found her again at the edge of the perimeter, the mountains shadowed in moonlight. "The Deadeye mark," he said after a long pause. "How many still recognize it?" "Fewer every year." "And what does it mean?" Ilowan's gaze stayed on the mountains, her voice soft but resolute. "That some skills can't be programmed, some instincts can't be replaced, and some people don't need recognition to be extraordinary." The colonel stood beside her in silence, the night colder but somehow steadier with her words. Orders were set, the mission loomed, the team was ready. But Ilowan knew readiness wasn't enough, not anymore. Because the war ahead wasn't just about enemies in the mountains. It was about proving that human dignity still had a place in battlefields designed for machines. And sometimes dignity didn't need to speak, it only needed to act. How do you measure victory when no one will ever know your name? The transport truck rumbled over broken terrain, headlights dimmed, its frame rattling against stones in silence. Inside, Blackwood's team sat in stillness, gear strapped, rifles across their laps. But they were different now. Their faces carried no arrogance, no blind trust in blinking screens, just focus, just readiness. At the front, Ilowan traced her finger across a physical map spread on her knee. The terrain etched in ink, not pixels. Every valley, every ridge memorized. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. When she spoke, the others leaned in, as though silence itself commanded them to listen. "Extraction zone here," she said softly, tapping the page. "Elevation gives us cover. If comms fail again, rally on the ridge line. No digital redundancy, visual signals only." Zephyr nodded, taking notes in his weathered notebook instead of on his disabled pad. Riven tapped the manual sights mounted on his rifle, adjusting them like they were lifelines. Octavia checked her pack twice, calm but thorough. Even Blackwood, once the loudest in any room, only asked quiet questions, his voice carrying respect instead of authority. The truck slowed, engines cut, silence thickened. They moved. The night air was sharp, brittle against their lungs. No glowing goggles, no humming drones, just boots, breath, and instinct. Ilowan led them into the folds of the mountains, her steps sure, every pause deliberate. Riven whispered once, "How can you tell where we are without the GPS?" Ilowan didn't look back. "Because the mountain tells me, you just need to learn to hear it." They reached the ridge before dawn, the compound below faint in the first pale light. This target wasn't as fortified as Voss's lab, but it wasn't meant to be. It was bait, a trap designed to lure them into trusting the same systems that had already betrayed them. Only this time, they hadn't brought the systems. Ilowan lay prone, rifle balanced, scope aligned. The mark carved into the stock caught the dim light, a silent emblem of everything that had brought them here. Through her scope, she watched shadows move inside the compound. Guards, patterns of patrol, predictable, machines could track them, but so could instinct. She gave no orders aloud, only hand signals. A flick of her fingers sent Octavia and Zephyr moving to flank. A tilt of her wrist positioned Riven closer to cover. Blackwood stayed near her, his binoculars lowered, trusting her eyes more than his own. Minutes stretched thin, then the breach. Zephyr moved first, silent as shadow, neutralizing the outer sensor grid with nothing but wire and touch. Octavia slipped past a guard and silenced him with a single strike. Riven covered their backs, his rifle braced with manual sights, his breathing steady just as Ilowan had taught him. Inside the compound, the target was secured without alarms, without chaos. The extraction took minutes, not hours. No comms, no digital systems, just instinct, patience, and precision. And when the enemy finally realized too late, it was Ilowan's rifle that spoke, 3 sharp cracks, each one precise, each one final. The team fell back across the ridge. No losses, no glitches, no betrayal. When the transport pulled away hours later, the sun was rising. Its light caught the edges of Ilowan's rifle case, worn smooth by years, its mark still etched deep. In the back of the truck, Riven sat with his rifle across his knees, staring at the manual sights he had once mocked. He looked up at her, hesitant. "You think I'll ever hear it, the way you do?" Ilowan studied him for a long moment, then answered simply, "If you stop trying to prove yourself, you might." He nodded, the words heavier than he wanted to admit. Octavia leaned against the wall, watching them. She caught Ilowan's hand drift again toward her pocket where the photograph lived. The other Deadeyes, the ones scattered across the world, carrying missions no one would ever know. She asked once more, softer this time, "Family?" Ilowan's reply was the same. "The ones who taught me recognition doesn't matter, only results." Blackwood sat across from her, his face lined, his pride stripped but replaced with something cleaner. Respect, trust, a quiet vow never spoken. The truck jolted over rough ground. Silence settled again, but it was a different silence than before, not heavy with suspicion or doubt. This silence carried weight but also steadiness. A team reborn. As the mountains receded in the distance, Ilowan looked out at the horizon. She knew the war wasn't over. Men like Whitmore would always rise. Machines would always advance. Betrayal would always breed in shadows. But she also knew something those machines never could. That dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand applause or recognition. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.